Hi there guys, and welcome back to Q1 Cars. Today's video unfortunately is one that I didn't really want to make, but the situation has now escalated to the point where I feel compelled to say something about this. As you all are probably aware, there is a terrible medical condition currently gripping the entire globe. No, I'm not talking about that condition. Everyone knows about that condition. I'm talking about a serious mental health issue. Dude, you can't do that. That's just... Sorry about that. He's a bit embarrassing at times. Where was I? Yes, I'm talking about a very serious mental health condition called Dieselitis. That's right. As many as 1 in 4 people out there honestly and truly believe that diesel cars are better than petrol cars. This condition is so serious, in fact, that it doesn't only affect the sufferer themselves, it also affects the family members of that person. In fact, we tried to interview some family members of people who suffer from dieselitis. Unfortunately, almost none of them were willing to talk to us on camera for fear of embarrassment. We did find one brave soul who was willing to lend his voice to this piece, provided we protect his identity.
Hi everyone, my name is Quentin. I mean Mr. Q. I mean Mr. X.
Can I do that bit again, please?
My name is Mr. X, and my wife suffers from dieselitis. When we first heard about my wife's condition, I was really depressed. I had to reevaluate all of my life choices, because I suddenly realized she was probably only attracted to me because I somewhat resemble a farm animal.
Yeah, that's a nice shirt, bro. Really, it's it's a popular design. Loads of people have these. Yeah. So doctors and scientists have been trying for years to find a cure to dieselitis. But unfortunately, because they don't know what causes it or how it develops in the brain, they've been unsuccessful in treating any patients to date. So rather than fighting against this incurable scourge, I decided today I would take out a car with a diesel engine. So that actually brings us to this. It's a type of car that I've never really understood, and it's never really made sense to me, but you know, they do seem to be quite popular. What we have under here is a small 1.5 litre turbo diesel engine. And when you put a turbo diesel engine in a small hatchback, what are you actually trying to do? Because a small hatchback like this is going to be economical as it is, even with a petrol engine in it. And being a Ford, it's probably going to be quite good fun to drive. So why would you spoil that by putting an engine in it that is inherently going to have a tiny little power band? So let's take this thing for a drive and see if there is actually a reason to buy one of these. So to see if there is any merit to this argument for dieselitis, I've decided to take out this 2016 Ford Figo TDCi, which is a small hatchback with a small diesel engine and a lot of torque. It's fitted with Ford's 1.5 litre turbo diesel engine, which chucks out some kilowatts, but crucially around 220 newton meters of torque, which for a car this size and this weight is quite a bit. Now, I say a lot of torque because that's what the diesel guys will argue is the plus point and the whole reason to have this car over the petrol equivalents. And yes, if you put your foot down, there is a satisfying surge of torque to it, but it is accompanied by that noise, which no matter how refined a diesel engine gets, you're always going to get that noise. And it must be said that once you're underway, it's not terrible in this car, right up to the point where you start getting up to highway speeds again. Because at highway speeds, the revs start getting so high that once again, that noise becomes quite evident. And the reason for that is because for some bizarre reason, Ford did not see fit to give this car a 6th gear. Clutch is nice and light, easy to modulate. But I say again, with the engine that it's got, it really needs a 6th ratio in order to just calm things down on the highway when your speeds get closer to 120 k's an hour. Because as it is, it becomes unbearable. It really does. If you have to sit at 120 k's an hour for several hours on end, you're going to get very tired of that diesel din constantly humming, thrumming, and vibrating at the front of this car. I drove this on the highway the other day for the first time, and honestly, after about 20 minutes, I'd had enough. I actually had to slow down to about 100 k's an hour just so that I can sort of calm things down under the bonnet. It really is quite intrusive when you're pushing on a bit. In terms of everything else, it's still a Ford Figo, so it's still going to drive like a Figo, and they are quite good fun to chuck around on little back roads like this with a few bends and that sort of thing. But all of that fun is going to be dampened by the fact that you've got this tiny rev range to work with, and there just isn't any way to get around it. Turbo lag is also quite pronounced on this car. You put your foot down and it does go, but it sort of takes a second to think about it before it actually whooshes off into the distance. Now that's kind of to be expected with a small capacity engine with a turbocharger on it, and it's going to be worse on a diesel because, let's face it, an oil burner doesn't have the get up and go that a petrol engine has when it's naturally aspirated anyway. So it really has nothing to give you until the turbo spools up. So your throttle response on this car, not the greatest, but I have to admit, it does have a certain quality that I am quite appreciative of. Because it's got so much torque from so low down, you don't have to row the gears the whole time. You can put it in 5th at anything from 60 and above and just cruise along. If you want to go a little bit faster, you move your foot and it'll go a little bit faster. It'll go up hills. It'll keep going with the air conditioning on in 5th gear without any issues whatsoever. Trying to accelerate away, it does get up and go, but you sort of put your foot down, wait a second, then there's a little squirt of torque, and then you run out of revs and you have to change gear and the whole process starts over again. So there's no linearity to the way that you can accelerate out of a junction like we just did, which is a shame because the grunt that you're getting is actually quite nice, and there's not a lot of torque steer, but I think there's actually a reason for that. Unfortunately, as much fun as the previous Figo was, and as much fun as all Fiestas throughout history have been, I must report that there is something with this car that is fundamentally wrong, which absolutely and completely ruins it for dynamic driving. And it's this. The steering in this car is absolutely, completely, 100% numb. No feeling in it whatsoever. As you're driving along here, I mean, this road's got little undulations and bumps and crests and cambers and things. Lots of interesting surfaces just on this little stretch of road. But I can't tell. If I'm turning the wheel, feel does increase very, very slightly, but not enough so that I can confidently say exactly what's happening with my contact patches at the front. And to really push on and start having fun with the thing, you need to know what the wheels are doing. And this car just doesn't tell you anything. So it's very difficult to have the confidence to really throw this at some corners and have fun with it, because it's just not talking to the driver at all. There is one good thing about this diesel. The torque. It does give it a really sort of muscular feel when you put your foot down and all of those torques come and shove you into the back of your seat and you just get surged forwards. The problem is the effect is very short-lived, because as with all diesel engines, it's got a very small rev range in which that torque surge actually comes through. Most of the time, this is not going to be a problem. You're going to be able to overtake things on the highway without changing back a gear. You're going to be able to pull out of junctions, and as long as you change gear at the opportune moment, you'll be able to make reasonable progress down the road without being a liability. It's actually the fastest accelerating Fiesta product, except for the ST. So, in some ways, you could consider the TDCi to be the top of the line model. However, there's a lot of stuff that this car should have that it doesn't. And the packaging is a little bit all over the place as well, because it's got a lot of stuff that I would have rather left behind. But I suppose that's why there are different options and packages available on most cars. You see, the Figo is Ford's entry-level budget offering. And the previous generation was based on the old generation of the Fiesta, which was a fantastic car. It was so much fun to drive, it was well put together, and it was great. I mean, I loved the Fiesta. I had loads of friends who had Fiestas. I was always slightly jealous of them because they really are good cars to drive. Now, this generation of Figo, which came out in 2016, is a little bit different, because this car was pretty much a ground up design, and unfortunately it was designed to be a budget car, and that shows. There are lots of little details about this car that really drive me up the wall. For example, if you look at the gauge cluster, everything's nice and neatly laid out. You can read all the information well enough. You've got an onboard computer that can tell you your average fuel consumption, your average speed, your range to empty, all of those wonderful things. But I don't have a rev counter. You have remote central locking. Great, I'll have that. You've got air conditioning. Fantastic. I think I'll have that. a CD player with a radio. Great stuff, I'll have that. Then you have Bluetooth connectivity for your cell phone, which is great, and I love that it's there, but I would rather have had electric windows. And this car has old-fashioned windy windows with particularly cheap and nasty plastic handles, by the way. However, one of the things that I feel is an absolutely glaring omission on this car is something as basic as a rear window demister, which this car doesn't have. I have never in my life driven a car that didn't have a rear window demister. My 1982 Ford Granada had a rear window demister, yet this doesn't. How much could it possibly cost per unit to include that in the car for Ford to think, nah, we'll give them aircon and Bluetooth, but seeing where you're going when you're reversing, not that important. We'll leave that out. The interior space is pretty good. I'm quite comfortable where I am. The seats are quite comfy as well. I could easily sit in this seat for several hours doing long road trips. And the ride is quite good as well. But like I said, at 100 k's an hour, it's fine. When you get up to 120, it starts getting to be a problem. There are elements of greatness about this car. It's a very nice, relaxed driver around town, and if it was my daily for the commute to work or whatever, this would be a brilliant car to have. But there are elements of it that are just silly, and you kind of have to ask yourself, why on earth did they do that? There are also parts of it, like the indicators, for example. I know it's a stupid thing to pick on, but operating the indicator on this car is a horrible experience. I cannot tell you how cheap the indicator switch feels when you push on it. The entire illusion of this being a nice car is completely spoiled. It feels so nasty and cheap when you push on the switch and it just goes into position. It's horrible. Unfortunately, this cheapness seems to become a theme throughout the rest of the car, and at some point or another you really just have to draw the line and call it a deal breaker. So what are my conclusions and final thoughts on the Figo diesel? Well, what it has done is showed me that there is actually room for a diesel in this segment. Having that little bit of extra torque and not using it as an enthusiast's car does make sense. The torque makes it a really lovely thing to drive as a daily, even though it isn't necessarily the most dynamically fun thing on earth to drive. Unfortunately, the Figo is not a car that I would buy. This car, with its silly packaging and cost-cutting measures in inappropriate places, it just kind of spoils the experience that little bit for me, and I can't really fall in love with it, which is not something that I've really ever been able to say about a Ford hatchback before. I really wanted to like this car. It's a shame I don't. So there you have it, guys. That's my test of the Ford Figo TDCi. Surprisingly enough, the diesel engine wasn't the deal breaker in the end, but yeah, it's just not a car for me. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you guys for the next one.